a generic overview of the zone and all of the discs that kind of fly similar to it. So really this is just an explanation of like overstable approach discs for beginners and intermediates, to kind of see what all of the different zones and zone dupes fly like. I have three here. I have one in base plastic, which is Jawbreaker, middle plastic, which is beat up ESP, and then I have a premium Crystal Flex one here. The zone itself is a 4303, which the 4 to me just means it's an approach disc, and then that 03 at the end means it's overstable. Overstable approach discs are those discs that you would use when you're just a little bit farther away from the basket, and don't really want to use a putter, but you need kind of something to get you just a little bit farther. I prefer to forehand them. I know a lot of people prefer to forehand overstable approach discs compared to putters, just because you get a little bit more torque resistance. Overstable approach discs hold up much better to torque than your typical putter, just because they're meant to hold torque on them. This is base plastic for Discraft, which means it's a little firmer and it's going to beat in a lot quicker compared to your premium plastic zones. So if you're looking for something for a lower arm speed, or something that you can get to flip up a little for a higher arm speed in a zone, then a Jawbreaker zone would be what you're looking for here. Next up here, I have two premium plastic zones. I have an ESP zone that's a little more beat up, so this one should hold torque pretty well, but it should still give us a nice stable flight. And then this is a premium Crystal Flex zone. And then an even higher quality would be like your confetti plastic, Z plastic, or the fused zone that I showed earlier. Z plastic would be your most overstable, most likely, but it also just depends on how new your zone is and what plastic it is. You're going to get a lot of different flights from a lot of different plastic zones, just because the plastic and the quality and the amount that the disc is beat in. So what you'll see on the profile of the disc is you have kind of a flat top right there with a super, super hard edge there, and that just is cutting the wind and allowing it to fade out, which is your overstable finish. But what happens as you beat a disc up is this line right here, this right here is the parting line, and the parting line will get lower and lower to the actual bottom of the disc here, which is the rim. And as the parting line gets closer to the rim, the more understable the zone becomes. Zones just typically don't get super understable because the parting line is so high and this angle is so steep. Now are some pretty typical zone dupes or zone clones, just other overstable approach discs. So I'll go ahead and go through these one by one. So first up, what we have is an Innova Toro, and this is a first run Toro. This, in my opinion, is just a little bit more overstable than a zone, but as they beat up, they start to fly more and more like a zone. And this is Innova's basically run at what a zone would be for Innova. This is a Star Toro. So this is it's a nice plastic Star Toro, and the parting line looks the exact same to the zone, exact same flatness. It feels very similar, but if you're looking for something that's just a tad more overstable than your regular kind of stock zone or anything, I would say go with a Toro, just because it's gonna give you that extra little bit of bite if you're going for a bigger forehand, or if you're trying to get a shot farther away from the basket than a zone, just because you can rip this one a little bit harder and it's going to hold torque a little bit better compared to your regular stock zone. Next up, what we have is an MVP Entropy, and this one is pretty beat up, but it's Cosmic Neutron. Similar to the Toro, is very flat, and similar to the zone, has a very nice parting line and a very steep angle here. This again is MVP's try at the zone. I think they got it pretty much similar to the Toro. In my opinion, the Entropy is fairly beefy compared to a regular zone. I like the zone just because when I forehand it, it rides straight, and right at the end of the flight is when it comes out of that. Or if I put it on anhyzer, it's going to fight back out of that anhyzer the whole way. The Entropy and the Toro like to fight out a lot sooner than the zone. So that would, to me, be more of a I'm throwing this wide and letting it kind of dump the whole way instead of going for straight to fade. The entropy is a 4303, same as the zone, but in my opinion, this should be similar to the Toro of 4314, just because of how beefy it is. But I have seen and thrown entropies that are a little less stable than this one. This entropy is fairly stable. We have is a Discmania Tactic, which is a 4203, which just means it has a tad less glide than a zone. This one is a hard exo, so this is more of a base plastic feeling one. It's a little firmer, and it's fairly beat up, so it's going to have a little more flip to it just because it's base plastic and it's beat up. So you'll see in the flight that it's probably going to flip up and ride. But in my opinion, a Tactic is not as stable as a zone. I think they had to flip up a little more so you can get a really nice flex S-line on a forehand or even a backhand. The Tactic has a lot thicker of a like flight plate up here, and then the parting line isn't as aggressive as the zone, and the parting line is a little lower, so this one has a little slimmer of a profile. This one also has a couple little dimples in it on top just because it's beat up, so you'll see in the flight that this one is going to have a little stranger of a flight. So I would say if you're looking for a Tactic, try one that's a little nicer plastic or newer, and don't base the entire flight just on the flight of this one Tactic, because this is a base plastic Tactic. And next up, what I have is one that I don't know if a ton of people know, but I do know that this one is kind of common. The Streamline Disc Stabilizer, which is another brand of MVP discs. So this is a 3.503. So it's a lower speed, a little higher glide, but same turn and fade to it as the zone. This one is a little deeper than a zone, and this is still that same flat, but a very thick rim to flight plate and a lower parting line. So in my opinion, this one is a little flippier than the zone, especially on a backhand. You can get this to ride Anheuser for a lot longer. If you're looking for something that's a little more overstable than a zone SS, but a little less stable than a zone, this is probably what you're looking for. Next up, what I have are two Prodigy discs here. I have an A2 and an A5. The A2 is the beefier version, and the A5 is a flippier version. The A2 has a lot slimmer of a profile, while the A5 has a thicker profile. The A5 feels more similar to the zone in my opinion, but the A2 flies more similar to the zone in my opinion. So if you're looking for something that feels a lot different than a zone but flies similar to a zone, I would say go for an A2. If you're looking for something that feels similar to a zone but likes to flip a little more, I would say go for an A5. Prodigy also has like the A1, A3, A4, obviously all those. These are the only two that I have. So if you want to see flights of those, I would say probably go check out another video. You'll see from the A2 that it's going to have just pretty much straight to fade the whole way. This is very, very overstable approach disc. The only one that's going to be more overstable is the A1. For Prodigy's line, the lower the number, the more overstable the disc is, and the higher the number, the less stable the disc is. This one for me kind of gets that really, really nice flex line, but it just really likes to go straight for a really, really long time, whereas the A2 likes to dump a lot quicker than the A5 does. But checking out the flight of the A2 first, what you'll see is straight fade, backhand and forehand. It's just going to go and then it's going to dump. Like I said, it's very thin profile, very, very thin flight plate, and a very, very aggressive line here and a very high parting line. And that is why it likes to dump so much. And then the A5 likes to, like I said, hold straight for a long time and then dump at the end, kind of like a zone. I do think that this is just like a half step below a zone, just because I'm pretty sure the flight numbers of this, the turn is a -1 and the fade is a -1. So it's like a -1-1 or a -1-2. So it really doesn't like to bite right at the end of the flight as much as like your typical zone would, but it's not as understable as like a zone SS is. So like this would be perfect for those people that have kind of a lower arm speed or are just starting out and looking for something like a zone but can't get a full flight out of a zone. I would say the A5 is probably for you, just because you're going to get a little bit more turn out of it than you would a typical stock zone. And you'll get that same flight that someone who has a higher arm speed or is a little more experienced would have with a regular zone. Okay, what I have up next are a couple weirder ones that I don't really hear people talk about. I've heard people talk about them on and off, and then there's a couple of these that I don't really know if a ton of people know of. But these are all still very similar to the zone in flight. A couple of them are very different in feel. So this section will be more of the hand feel section. But if you're looking for something that flies similar to a zone, this is like perfect for you. So if you want something that flies like a zone but feels different in your hand, these are the discs that you're looking for. Next up is the Lone Star Harpoon, and this is very thin compared to the zone. This is even thinner than the A2. Very high parting line, steep angle. This is more mid-range feeling, so if you're looking for something that feels more like a mid-range but flies like a zone, this is definitely what I would recommend. This one, it feels like you can get it really far, but it doesn't really go much farther than you're seeing me throw, just because it is a lower speed. I think this one is a 5-speed. I may be wrong on that. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. But it does fly very similar to a zone, and that's why I threw it in here. So definitely check it out if you haven't, because if you want something with a little slimmer of a feel than the zone, this is definitely what you're looking for. Okay, next up I have somewhat of a controversial one just because I don't really know what people think of this, but this is a Trash Panda Canyon, and I did put it in my zone versus zone clone shorts. The numbers on this are 4302. So this is a zone clone because of the numbers. Now, feel wise, it feels more like an approach mid range just because it has a bead, which I only have one other one here that has a bead. And not a lot of these approach discs have beads that are similar to a zone. So in hand feel, this is definitely different than a zone, but I would say it flies similar to a zone, except for the fact that I do think that these tend to go farther than zones. So like backhand, this is perfect. Like if you don't really like backhanding a zone like me, I don't prefer to backhand a zone. I prefer backhanding a canyon just because I get the same flight of a zone with a little bit better of a like hand feel than a zone. It's got a little shallower flight plate. So like hand feel wise, it's very shallow for a nice backhand. It feels almost like a mid-range. So if you're looking for something with a little better hand feel, if you like beaded approach discs, definitely try out the Canyon. I cannot recommend this disc enough. Okay, this one's a little newer. This is a Vessel by Thought Space. And fun little fact, this is just the mold of the original Ringer Zone from the Zone Battle Pack a couple years ago. So if you see on here, the Vessel has a little bit of a thumb track on it right there. So the flight plate is just lowered into it a little, which that just means that it flies the same as a zone, but it has a nice little thumb track, which is perfect for forehand or backhand, just because your thumb doesn't slip as like easily. I love the Vessel. Right now in my bag, this is like probably my favorite approach disc. It's very close to a zone. I prefer to throw this over a zone just because it has a little bit straighter flight than a zone, in my opinion. I could be very wrong, but for me, I feel like the Vessel is a little more maneuverable than your regular zone. Okay, next up what I have is a Casoplast K1 line yarn. This is another one that I don't know if a ton of people have heard of, but I know a lot of my friends have heard of it. This, in my opinion, is also another one that's going to be a little beefier than the zone. It's a 4.5303. And it has a very, very aggressive parting line. It's very high, and it has a rounded angle here, which I think just cuts through the wind a little quicker. When you see, like you'll see on the flight that it has a very, very overstable finish, and it doesn't really like to hold turn because it pretty much fights out of it almost immediately. When you beat these in, however, though, they really like to fly nice. They almost fly like an overstable mid-range instead of an approach disc. And you can get these things really far if you throw it right. So if you haven't thrown a yarn, definitely check one out. They're very good, and I almost think they're a little closer to a Zone OS. So if you're looking for, again, something closer to a Zone OS or a little more overstable finish to a zone, definitely check out a yarn. Okay, next up is another weirder one, and this is a finish line chicane. I personally love this, and I might actually end up bagging it. This is another one that's similar to the Toro, in that it's a little more overstable than a typical zone. I also love this clear plastic, but it has a lot more bite than a zone does, but it feels very, very similar to a zone. I'm pretty sure it has the same flight numbers as a zone. I don't actually know the numbers on it. It's literally, in my opinion, the exact same as a zone. Same flat top, same rounded edge, same aggressive angle, same parting line, almost the exact same hand feel. It almost feels more similar to a Zone than a Toro does, but it has that little more overstable finish, which means it'll take longer to beat in than your typical Zone would. So definitely check out the Chicane if you haven't, if you're looking again for another more overstable version. Okay, what I've got next is these next ones are going to be the really weird ones. So I have the Doomsday Discs Crisis. And in my opinion, this one's very weird just because of how flat topped it is. And this little thin flight plate, and then a very aggressive line similar to the Yarn, but the parting line is a lot higher. And the numbers on this is a 4204. This almost flies more like a Discraft Swarm. And it feels more like a Discraft Swarm than it does like a Zone. But it's got the flight numbers of a Zone, and that's why I put it in here. So like in the flight, you'll see it literally is just overstable the whole way. This is like almost Zone OS. Like that's why I'm saying it's more like a Swarm, just because it feels like a mid-range, it flies like a mid-range, but it has the numbers of an approach disc. So I guess if you're looking for a really flat topped approach disc that feels like a mid-range in your hand and has a ton of bite to it, forehand and backhand, definitely check this out. And then the last one I've got here is the Viking Discs Loki. This is a base plastic one. It's ground plastic. This is a 4204. And it's got the weirdest profile here for an approach disc. You can see it's got the bead, very flat top, thin flight plate, and a very curved angle there with the bead. So again, if you're looking for something with a nice flat top, with a weird feeling, kind of shallow feel to it for forehand or backhand, that's fairly cheap. Definitely go check out a Loki, because I would say this thing, since it's base plastic, is going to beat in very nicely. And once it's beaten in, you can probably get some really nice flex lines out of it, or even just some nice straight flights on a backhand or a forehand for an approach disc. So if you're looking for something like that, and you're liking the flight of it, definitely go check this out. Okay, so that's all I've got. I know I missed a bunch of them, and there are a ton more Zone dupes and overstable approach discs that I didn't include here. These are all just ones that I had in my collection. If there are any more that you guys would like to see me throw, let me know in the comments, and I will try my best to get some and throw them for you guys. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a ton of fun making it. I really love the Zone and overstable approach discs. I bag a ton of them. They're a ton of fun to throw. Cannot recommend them enough. If you found something that you really like in this video, one of the discs, and you ended up trying it and loving it, let me know in the comments. I would love to see all of the discs that you guys love for this slot. And if you guys want to see more videos like this of more disc types, like understable approach discs, or even like distance drivers, overstable distance drivers, stuff like that, let me know. I have a ton of stuff in my collection and would love to make more of these, so just let me know what you guys want to see. And thanks for watching.